And our next guest has written a book, which hasn't come out yet, but is coming out soon, I think. And he can tell us more about that. It's Chris Williamson.
Hi, Crispin.
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. Thanks. Yeah, not bad at all.
So can you tell us the book's called 10 Years Hard Labour?
Yeah, here it is.
Title, I thought, by the way. When does it come out?
19th of July.
19th of July. So, well, a couple of weeks or so.
If people find my Twitter or Facebook page, it's pinned to the top on where they can order it from.
Well, yeah, I'm hoping to put this out as a clip as well. So
great.
More.
Thank you.
I mean, your 10 years. I mean, what 10 years you've had there?
Yeah, indeed.
So that was you were MP for Derby North.
That's right.
Beginning of the 10 years of this. What were you like then? Did you think Labour was a great vehicle for radical social change?
I don't know about radical social change. I mean, I joined the Labour Party in 1976, got elected to Parliament in 2010. It was a huge privilege. Never thought I'd end up as a member of Parliament when I first joined the Labour Party. I was recruited actually in 1976 by Philip Whitehead, who was a previous member of Parliament for Derby North. And he was a very well-educated, erudite guy who, was a TV producer and so on. And it was me, an apprentice bricklayer when I first joined the Labour Party. So I never ever thought I'd end up in the corridors of power, as it were. It was an amazing privilege to be elected to Parliament. And yes, I guess I always did feel, maybe naively, that the Labour Party was the best vehicle for delivering some form of progressive social change. And also very naively, I hoped that if one day we could build a mass membership, maybe elect a left-wing leader, we could really turn the Labour Party into the kind of genuine socialist vehicle that I think, most people probably who joined the Labour Party hoped that it would be. And obviously we had that, and we still weren't able to achieve the sort of socialist utopia, I suppose, that we thought we might get a taste of had we successfully got Jeremy over the threshold of 10 Downing Street. We sort of climbed to the top of the mountain, as I've said on a number of occasions, glimpsed the promised land, and then got dragged back down rather ferociously. And I think what I've tried to do in this book, I've talked about my first period in Parliament and the Miliband years. And I supported Ed Miliband for the leader. He, I suppose, put himself forward as a kind of modest left-wing alternative. He was the only candidate I thought capable, and so it proved to be, the only candidate capable of defeating his brother, who was the continuity New Labour candidate. And indeed, Ed talked about turning the page on New Labour. And as I pointed out in the book, never ever really achieved that. He stuffed his first shadow cabinet full of New Labour aficionados, and we just continued down the neoliberal path. And in a way, a bit like Jeremy, but far, far worse, of course. He lost his way. He didn't sort of stick to his instincts. I think had Ed stuck to his instincts and actually, delivered what he promised he would do. For example, one of the things that Ed said was that if we'd listened to our members a bit more when we were in government, we wouldn't have made as many mistakes. And I made that point over and over again on the Democracy Roadshow, pointing out that had we listened to our members, I say our members, I'm no longer a member, as I know you aren't either, Crispin, but you know what I mean. We wouldn't have gone to war in Iraq. We wouldn't have cut social security benefits. We wouldn't have brought private healthcare into the National Health Service. We wouldn't have introduced tuition fees. We wouldn't have introduced academy schools. We would have stopped the privatisation agenda in its tracks. We would have had a proper industrial strategy. We would have ended the offshoring of good quality skilled jobs. We would have dealt with the precarious sort of employment market that is now endemic throughout the land. And, we didn't listen to our members in government. And there was a chance, I think, with Jeremy that, we could put the members in the driver's seat. That's what I was keen to do. And indeed, Jeremy did talk in those terms in the early days, but then never ever really kind of followed through on it, sadly. And so what I've tried to do is talk about how dreadful the Miliband years were and some of the kind of, inside stories on some of the kind of, machinations that went on in the parliamentary Labour Party at that time, which just kind of reinforced what basically a new Labour vehicle it was continuing to be under Ed Miliband. But we did talk about turning base. And then, of course, the mistakes that Jeremy made in not actually standing up to the saboteurs and the Zionist lobby, which actually skewered him in the end and killed the project.
Can I just come in, because I remember that Miliband time, because I was in the Labour Party then, and he seemed to come out with quite progressive policies, and then Ed Balls was the shadow chancellor, wasn't he? And he'd say, "Oh no, we're not going to change from austerity." Effectively, no. He just never seemed to have full control, did he?
No. He didn't. I mean, and he was in the same situation to a lesser extent because he kind of shared some of those policy values, I think, of the kind of new Labour era. I mean, he was, let's remember, in Gordon Brown's cabinet. But yeah, I mean, you know, he was undone really by the Parliamentary Labour Party again. Ed was, you know, I mean, and he was subjected not again to anywhere near the extent that Jeremy was, but I mean, the abuse that Ed took was pretty egregious, actually, you know. And until Jeremy came along, you know, I thought that was probably about as bad as it was going to get. But obviously, I didn't reckon with what actually happened. I mean, and again, naively, I think there's a lot of naivety. Really, the scales have fallen from my eyes. It took me to over the age of 60 to realise that, you know, these characters are not Democrats. And I was, believe it or not, very popular in the Parliamentary Labour Party from 2010 to 2015, with people like Chris Leslie and Toby Perkins. All these characters were kind of considered as a friend, really. But they all turned on me when I lent my support to Jeremy. And you know, as you say, you know, the kind of rest is history, really. But yeah, I mean, I think.
I mean, that's quite. I mean, can I just come in, because I was expelled last week. And. You know, I never thought I'd be expelled from.
Well, absolutely.
And, you know, I can. I mean, your position from the time that you were suspended. I can't remember the whole story, but the way that you've been kind of ostracised by former colleagues. I mean, how does that affect you? Because do you actually feel that you can trust people? Has it had an effect on your psychology?
I think you've got to try and put that behind you. I think you've got to, you know, trust people, actually, because you can just become incredibly cynical. And I don't want to become a cynical person. It can make you cynical. I've been incredibly disappointed, really hurt, actually, by, you know, people who I thought were genuine comrades. But actually, Crispin, people who I looked up to, people who I thought I wasn't really worthy of them, I didn't feel. You know what I mean? Coming from, maybe it's my working class sort of roots, I don't know, with a chip on my shoulder or whatever. But as I said, when I joined the Labour Party, you know, I was a young 19-year-old apprentice bricklayer, and it was just amazing to get into Parliament. But I suffered from imposter syndrome, I think. And, you know, a lot of these people have been around the block a while, and I just thought I just admired them, you know, really, I didn't feel worthy of them. And they just all let me down. They all stabbed me in the back, actually. You kind of expect it from the right-wingers, even those who I thought were friends previously. You can kind of understand that a little bit. But people who, like in the Socialist Campaign Group, you know, that was the most difficult thing to take, actually. And, you know, people say, oh, it's politics. I don't buy that, actually. You know, for me, politics should be an honourable thing. It should be about trying to create a better world. It should be trying to, you know, make life better for people, not this bullshit that we get involved in, this kind of, you know, the parliamentary parlour games, you know, who's up, who's down, all this crap that's going on about Boris Johnson now. What difference will it make if Boris Johnson goes? It made no bloody difference. We'll get some other Tory shit back on it, you know. It might be even worse. You know, that's the fact of the matter. They're all neoliberals. Labour and Tory are neoliberals to the core. And we're not going to get any change in this country until people wean themselves off voting for the Labour Party. Now, that might sound an extreme position to take, but we are not going to make the change that's desperately needed if the Labour Party, you know, win the next election or some subsequent election in the future, because they're committed to maintaining the status quo. They'll tinker at the edges, but there will be no fundamental transformation. of society. And even that 1945 Labour government, Crispin, didn't make sufficiently fundamental changes, because although they heralded in a post-war consensus which lasted for 34 years, and I certainly benefited from that as an apprentice bricklayer, the year I joined the Labour Party, I also bought a brand new house in a desirable village backing onto a waterfront. I could do that because inequality was narrowing every year from 1945. But even that government didn't go as far as it should and could have done. It should have abolished private education. Public schools should have gone. You know, it could have been a force for anti-imperialism, but it actually continued an imperialist agenda. And indeed, people like Nye Bevan and Harold Wilson resigned from the cabinet because of the imperialist tendency of the government in actually the Labour government in going into bed with the Yanks and in going into a war in Korea. And they actually made cutbacks. I mean, this is why Nye Bevan resigned, if you remember. They made cutbacks in national health spending, introduced tuition fees, introduced the prescription fees and so on, and broke that fundamental principle that Nye Bevan was so committed to, and he left as a consequence of that. And so, as I say, even that 45 government, which, you know, we herald and clearly did some great things, and as I've said, set in train that post-war consensus. But what we should have done, what we were hoping to try and achieve with that 1974 manifesto, where we actually committed, the Labour Party, I keep saying we, the Labour Party, I'm no longer a member, to an irreversible shift in the balance of wealth and power. And we were moving in that direction until Dennis Healey stupidly went to the International Monetary Fund and, you know, drew down this loan, which we never needed, actually. I mean, just nonsense. You know, I mean, we are a currency issuing nation. We'd come off the Bretton Woods agreement. You know, money is no object. You know, it's bullshit what he did. And that was the first monetarist government. That was the first neoliberal government. People talk about Thatcher being the first monetarist neoliberal government. You know, she was you know, obviously influenced by people like Friedrich Hayek. But it wasn't her. She turbocharged it, yes. But the first neoliberal monetarist government in this country after the war was the Callaghan-Healey government. They're the ones that did it. And they paved the way for Thatcher. They paved the way for 18 years of Thatcherism. They effectively paved the way for New Labour. I mean, really, it was Kinnock who was the midwife, as we know. But ultimately, you know, the damage was done in 1976 because the IMF insisted on a big, massive austerity package.
Can I just ask you another question about how you regard the Labour Party? Do you think that now that you've been expelled, or is it? I don't. What are you?
No, I resigned. I was suspended, and then reinstated, then resuspended, then won my court case in the High Court, but was still suspended, and then dropped as a parliamentary candidate, even though Jeremy had said that I was going to be the official candidate the week before.
Do you find, because talking to you, you've said we, and you've corrected yourself about not being the Labour Party. Do you find that you're trying to kind of rethink you and the Labour Party all the time? It's an ongoing process? Because you were so committed to Labour.
Yeah, absolutely. I was defined by the Labour Party, Crispin, and indeed I put a little vignette in the book where I talk about the early days of being a Labour Party member and how I was given the responsibility, because in those days the Labour Party is a fundraising exercise. Lots of constituency Labour parties used to run a tote, and I used to go around the local village where I used to live, various Labour supporters, collecting the tote money every week. And when I used to get to a little council estate, West End Drive, in the village I lived in called Shardlow, if the kids were out playing, they'd shout, "The Labour man's here, Mum, the Labour man's here, Dad," you know. And I thought to myself, on the day that I was booted, you know, Christ, the Labour man is no more. And it is difficult because that, you know, the Labour Party was defined me, Crispin. I was Labour Party through and through, and I stuck with the Labour Party, even into the dark days of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, and felt that, you know, we can maybe still get some crumbs from the table. We still had the prospect, potentially, I felt naively, that one day, if we can build the membership, that's what I always used to encourage members, you know, the public, people, to join the Labour Party, help us change it. Yeah. You know, we can change it because we're a democratic. We're not. I thought we were, but we're a democratic party. And if we get enough members in, you know, we can change it. And we were moving in that direction. I mean, Jeremy used to speak to crowds of thousands. I mean, it's the biggest, you know, the biggest rallies we've ever seen in places like Derby, where I'm from. It was unbelievable. And what I talk about in this book is that opportunity that we had, that potential that we had of that mass movement was never, ever mobilized. And when I went around the country on the Democracy Roadshow, I was making the point that we need to build this movement because the establishment won't lie down, even if we were to have got the democracy reforms through and got a decent parliamentary Labour, because bloody Labour MPs are just a pile of crap, as you know. The establishment will do their damnedest to destroy a Corbyn-led Labour government if it dares to implement a relatively modest socialist and anti-imperialist, that was the main thing they were pissed off about, anti-imperialist agenda. And I used to say to people, you know, this is no exaggeration, I used to say to them, we will need a mass movement on the streets to defend a Labour government, a radical Labour government, because we know, and you remember, I'm sure, Crispin, just after Jeremy was elected, he got a serving army general saying that they would use fair means or foul to stop a Corbyn government cutting defence spending, etc.
I remember that the membership number was about 500,000 after the coup, the chicken coup, and the general election in 2017. And I was saying at the time, if we get 1 million members, it will scare the hell out of the establishment, and we can really win because we'll have people in every road who can just go down their own road and knock on the doors. They won't have to go into other areas. We could have one person. But
we were very close. We were very close, Crispin.
They didn't follow it through, did they? There was no concerted attempt from 2017 onwards to recruit more members. It was nothing happened.
Crispin, I cover this in the book.
Yeah.
Because they changed their mindset. I was like a lone voice. I mean, who am I? I'm nobody. I'm just a bloody ex-bricklayer from Derby, but it was bloody plain as a pikestaff to me. We had to remain the insurgent party. But I used to get calls almost every day from the leader's office saying, why have you said this? Why have you said that? Don't go on this programme. Don't go on that programme. Don't say this, don't say that. And I remember having a big stand-up row with one of them, and I cover it in the book. And I said, look, there's nothing I've said that Jeremy didn't say in his leadership campaigns. And the response was priceless. They said, but that was a leadership campaign. And we're now a government in waiting. And so we have to be more circumspect. And I said, you're 180 degrees wrong. That's exactly the mistake that Ed Miliband made. If you start triangulating, you're going to lose all these people that have been inspired, and we're just not going to make any progress at all. And ultimately, that will kill us, that will consume us. Now, I'm no great political soothsayer, Crispin, but that was plain common sense. But it just seemed like I was a voice in the bloody wilderness when I was making these points.
They do that. Jeremy Corbyn would go on with his tie and his suit, and they started to make him smarter. He'd participate in PMQs in a similar way to former leaders. And it was all about, like you're saying, looking like the party in waiting. It was some kind of advice from
yes, it was
bygone era. It was something from Miliband's advisors.
Before, absolutely. There's huge pressure to conform, Crispin. Don't underestimate that. Massive pressure. And they're bullies, those people in Parliament, which we've seen. Massive pressure to conform. But I think Jeremy, fine, wear a suit. No problem with that, really. I mean, I quite like to get dressed up, but maybe that's because I'm working class, and it's the middle class that don't worry too much about being smart, I think, in my experience. But anyway, I fine wearing a suit. But the way that he used to conduct PMQs in the early days, I think was great. And I think the other thing that he did talk about, and he didn't follow through on this at all, actually. But if you remember in the early days, what he said was, why should it be the leader that deals with PMQs every week? Maybe we should, rotate this and let other senior members of the party, take the lead, as it were. And I remember Tony Benn, talking in these sorts of terms. And let's not forget, that Jeremy was a protege of Tony Benn, and he talked about leadership being like a wheel with spokes, And I think that was the sort of approach that Jeremy was wanting to implement, but massive pressure on him, And the problem was, not just the PLP, but the people he had around him. They just weren't up to it, mate. And again, I've covered that in the book too. But
I mean, that was such a blunder. And then the fact that you were kind of, as we're using this expression, thrown under the bus. It's just so that time was such a waste,
It
wasn't
was
it?
terrible, mate. And to be honest with you, Crispin, I used to quite relish, if I'm honest, the furore that I used to create in the Parliamentary Labour Party. They hated me. Whenever I went and spoke at the Parliamentary Labour Party meeting, they would howl me down. I mean, not just shout me down. There was like an orchestrated thing to howl me down. Now, I've got a loud voice, and I just, raise my voice, louder, as it were. But, I think that, Jeremy, and this happened to Jeremy every week. And, the PLP meetings were really not fit for purpose. And some people were saying, actually, in the kind of campaign group meetings and stuff like that, why are we even kind of continuing to facilitate these things? Because it just creates an opportunity for the haters to have a go and to provide some more lines for the for the media. I mean, it was not a great time to be there. But I thought I was bulletproof, and used to relish those jeers and shouts, because I thought I was bulletproof, to be honest with you. I mean, I was Jeremy's loudest cheerleader, his most loyal lieutenant. I mean, and when people who were close to Jeremy told me in the run-up to the 2017 election to distance myself from Jeremy, because the most important thing was getting in and he was an electoral liability, is what they said to me. And I cover this in the book as well. And some of them have openly admitted that they say it. But I said, I'm not going to do that for two reasons. One, I think it's a dishonourable thing to do, if I can sound slightly pompous for a moment. And Jeremy's a friend and somebody who I respect. But secondly, I think the programme that Jeremy's articulating is actually popular. And so we issued a press release saying that I'm the most Corbyn-friendly candidate standing anywhere in the country in England's most marginal seat, and that my election will be a test case for Corbynism. And of course, that whetted the appetite of the gutter press, of the corporate hacks. And they sort of descended on Derby North, all of them thinking I was going to fall flat on my face. And I tripled the majority that I achieved. It's not a big one in 2010, but I tripled that, more than tripled it, actually. We got won by 613 in 2010 and won by 2015. Certain symmetry there, because I lost in 2015, and then majority when I won it back was 2015. And so it proved, that agenda was popular, as Giles Brandreth found when he was looking for secret socialists in Guildford. And lots of people who would maybe identify as conservatives actually supported the programme, and that's what we should have been focused on. And one thing I was also saying as well, as part of the democracy reforms, we needed to completely reform how the regional offices operated. Because I used to say, if we shut the regional offices down, not only would we not miss them, but there would be a positive benefit. And I tell you what, Crispin, at every meeting, there was a loud cheer. I said that they should be focused on just two things. One, community organising in working class communities, and two, political education and development of constituency Labour parties. That should be their only purpose, but instead of the bullshit bureaucracy that they get involved with. And they're all kind of, that's been in my experience anyway, right-wing saboteurs, as we saw in the run into the 2017 and indeed 2019 election.
Yeah, that's why I got expelled, because of those directors.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's not just the directors. I mean, they all seem to be, and one person who should remain nameless. I mean, I don't expect everybody to have an encyclopedic knowledge of Labour history, but there was a comrade of mine who was doing some part-time work there, under sufferance actually, and he'd been at the Tolpuddle Martyrs festival with me, speaking about the exploitation of the bonded labourers in Qatar building the World Cup infrastructure, and he brought back a mug with Tolpuddle Martyrs on it. And this individual in the regional office, in a senior position in the regional office, said, "Oh, what's the Tolpuddle Martyrs?" And they'd never even heard of them. And that was the problem. I mean, Blair, that era, he'd kind of like just sort of cleared out, all of the kind of politicos and just replaced them with, I don't know, bloody drones or whatever, and If you remember, they used to talk, ideology is dead and all that. But you expect a bit. I mean, this person was a senior position that interacting with the media and the public, without wanting to give too much away about who it is. But bloody hell, I mean, that's the level of it,
But now that you're not in the party, it's given you a freedom to talk about things that you might not have. I mean, actually, having said that, it's not like you didn't say anything when you were in the party. You still spoke out then anyway.
I did, but I was circumspect. I mean, and I did actually respect the, those overtures from the leader's office and so on. And, I recognise that politics is the art of the possible and all that kind of stuff. But but I did try and speak out as much as I could. And frankly, I wished I'd spoken out more strongly on certain issues. For example, I wished I'd spoken out more strongly and not listened to the siren voices about Israel and the Zionist lobby and the rest of it. I mean, it's an appalling, racist, disgusting apartheid state that's been built on stolen land, brutally and ruthlessly exploits and treats the Palestinian people with absolute contempt. And the Israel lobby in this country are a bloody disgrace and have far too much influence and power. That's not anti-Semitic in any way, shape or form to say that. And that's what Jeremy should have been saying right from the outset. Because that's what killed Jeremy more than anything. The bullshit anti-Semitism agenda. Anti-Semitism that was not really an issue at all. I mean, you speak to Jewish members of the party. I think you've covered this on the programme before, Crispin. People, long-standing Jewish members of the party, 30, 40, 50 years, have never encountered anti-Semitism. One member had been a member for 50 years, said, oh yeah, there was one occasion in 1970 where he encountered some anti-Semitic remarks from a member. The Labour Party, was not a racist party in any way, shape or form. There may be a bit of political ignorance maybe on some of these issues, but as Jackie Walker said, you don't sort of start pointing the finger at people and accusing them. You kind of put your arm around them. It should be about political education, shouldn't it? Working with people in that sense and raising consciousness. That's I wish I'd spoken out more strongly on that. I mean, as a favour, on the day I was suspended, I issued an apology foolishly.
We've got to stop in a minute, but I just wanted to ask you: do you think that the atmosphere around anti-Semitism smearing, do you think that's changed recently?
Well, I mean, they're still smearing people. I still get smeared. I mean, I've as a result of the activities of the Zionist lobby, I've now had my personal social media profile designated as Iran state-affiliated media.
I was ask you about that. I mean, that George Galloway's Russian and you're Iranian. Yes. Do you talk to each other?
George is taking legal action, and I'm considering
different states. But are you going to take them to court for that, or?
Well, George is in court. I'm seeking legal advice, and it's obviously these things are expensive, and I mean, I'm not a man of means, as it were. So
it's terrible that they do that to someone.
It's absurd, mate. But it's all about trying to delegitimize anti-imperialist voices, to delegitimize, socialist voices, to delegitimize people who will, take on the kind of neoliberal hegemony. Because the establishment, the neoliberal imperialist establishment, the war machine thrives on ignorance. And the media are their mouthpiece, they're essentially stenographers, the corporate media, to just feed people bullshit. And this is why platforms like what you do, Crispin, and others like the Canary and Squawkbox and so on, Grey Zone in the States, and people like Jimmy Dore are so crucial. And it's really important that we amplify those voices because, we're in a very dangerous place at the moment in the world. We're potentially hurtling towards World War III, for Christ's sake, potential nuclear holocaust. The authoritarianism is growing in this country, aided and abetted, not actually challenged by the Labour Party, aided and abetted by the Labour Party. The authoritarian in chief is Sir Keir Starmer. His record as DPP is atrocious. It's appalling. And his hands are dirty as far as, the great iconic journalistic figure of Julian Assange is concerned. So, as I say, we've got to wean ourselves off the Labour Party. We have to, as difficult as it is, find a way of building an alternative. We need to put pressure on the trade unions that are still affiliated to the Labour Party. What in God's name is any trade union doing, giving money to this dysfunctional political monstrosity of the Labour Party? I mean, it's just been taken over by the bloody body snatchers or something. I mean, the cuckoos, as Tony Benn used to call them. And we have no prospect of, they're just giving cover to the likes of Sir Keir Starmer to, continue down this bloody road. I mean, they can't even come out and support the rail workers, for crying out loud. They're not, they're miles behind where public opinion is at. I mean, and it should be the role, shouldn't it, of a political movement to, try and shape public opinion. But all they're interested in is defending the status quo. As I keep saying, defending the neoliberal, imperialist status quo. They're in bed with the war machine, the military-industrial complex. These characters.
Well, look, I think we could talk for a long time.
We could, yeah.
I'm pleased to see you on here because I'm expelled now, and I have to say, anyone who hasn't been expelled from the Labour Party is quite strange. Or you resigned, but
effectively was. I mean, I was on a trajectory for expulsion, Crispin.
I mean,
so.
you don't really know who your friends are
No.
sometimes, but it's good that I can talk to you anyway because you're not in the party. So I've got one friend here.
Of course, you have, comrade. You've got thousands of friends, Crispin, and that's what we need to draw strength from that and stand together and let's build an alternative.
Well, we talked about the miners' strike at the beginning. We've got this solidarity is key.
Completely.
And I'm a bit cheesed off with the people who talk about solidarity a lot.
Yes.
Practice it.
Absolutely.
I won't name names. Okay. Thank you, Chris.